Australia is a continent that's been hit hard by human impact. At different times, settlers from Asia and Europe brought in all sorts of animals, and the isolated lands just weren't ready for them. There was no natural way to keep populations in check, and the local environment wasn't built to handle these new species. In the end, Australians are now suffering huge losses because the introduced foxes, along with dogs and cats, are eating up livestock, and ecologists are concerned that each of these animals is also driving endemic species to extinction, species that were totally unprepared for such neighbors. Donkeys are among the animals causing trouble for struggling Australia, and the harm they do is way more serious, since it impacts both the local biodiversity and the land's fertility. And you know what's really surprising? As you travel across Australia, you might come across a spot where donkeys were purposely let loose on land that wasn't even remotely fertile to begin with. Why would anyone do that? Today, we're going to figure it out. When European settlers arrived in Australia, they brought horses with them. These animals are good for just about everything. You can ride them, use them to haul stuff, and their strength makes them perfect for farming. But there was a problem. These plants. Gastrolobium and oxylobium are native to the Australian continent. They contain a highly toxic compound the imported horses weren't ready for. It's deadly to animals. People figured that if donkeys have a digestive system that can handle poisonous plants, why not use them instead of horses? Besides, donkeys don't need as much water as horses or other large livestock. A perfect solution that was actively used for many years. However, with the arrival of the first cars and railways in the early 20th century, donkeys were no longer needed. Human-made machines were easier to handle and lasted much longer. Donkey owners, unwilling to spend money on keeping and transporting the abandoned animals, simply opened the gates. The donkeys wandered off into the wild and quickly adapted to the harsh conditions of central and western Australia. With no natural predators and the ability to survive even in the driest times, they didn't just make it, they multiplied at an alarming rate. There are currently around 5.7 million wild donkeys living in Australia, making this one of the largest populations in the world. When conditions are right, their numbers can grow by as much as 25% a year. And without targeted control measures, the population keeps growing rapidly. By as early as 1949, the authorities in Western Australia had officially declared wild donkeys pests. But no coordinated efforts to control them were made until the 1970s and 1980s. Which gave the animals plenty of time to cause serious damage to Australia. And they're still doing it. A large number of donkeys on Australian soil has seriously changed the landscape and damaged ecosystems. First off, the pressure from their hooves per unit area is 1.5 times greater than that of cattle, which leads to soil compaction and lowers its ability to absorb water. Water that can't soak in stays on the surface, eroding the thin, fertile top layer during strong winds and heavy rain. Seeds barely get a chance to grow, and the soil layer doesn't regenerate, especially after long droughts. Intensive grazing of wild vegetation by donkeys makes pastures unsuitable not only for native kangaroos and wombats, but also for cattle when farmers try to bring grazing back to degraded lands. Donkeys eat up to 2.5% of their body weight daily, often destroying young shoots and root systems of many shrub and grass species. This not only leads to desertification, but also reduces biodiversity. Sagebrush, endemic grasses, and food plants for valuable birds and small mammals disappear. On top of that come the financial losses for farmers and pasture owners. Wild donkeys break and wreck fences, push livestock into insecurely fenced plots, damage watering spots, and at times leave whole tracts made of earth deposits behind. The cost of repairing farms and parts of the infrastructure runs into millions of Australian dollars every year, while government compensation programs and controlled culling in some regions cost the budget hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. To tackle the invasion, the government of Western Australia and federal agencies have come up with several approaches. For example, the most extreme one is large-scale culling, carried out both by ground teams and helicopter squads. Thanks to modern technology, helicopters can be fitted with thermal cameras to detect animals hiding in the shrubbery, and GPS tracking helps map out the cleanup routes. In the end, around 570,000 animals have been shot over the past several decades. That's a massive figure. Despite this, each group of donkeys caught is quickly replaced by new ones, and because of the animals' expanding range and changing climate conditions, control efforts remain patchy. The situation's only made worse by social tension Many farmers complain about the damage, but at the same time criticize the culling methods as inhumane. Activists and animal rights defenders oppose mass slaughter, calling for more civilized approaches, from humane capture and sterilization to commercial use of the meat and hides for traditional medicine. However, none of these methods have become widespread yet due to high costs and organizational challenges in remote areas. Still, there are other ways to deal with donkeys, besides shooting them, and it must be said, these options are incredibly useful and could, in a way, become a salvation for Australia. At Kitchana Station in Kimberley, Western Australia, farmers have, for the first time, managed to turn wild donkeys from enemies of the landscape into a key tool for its restoration. Starting at a certain point, farmers gather a herd of 110 to 250 donkeys on severely depleted areas where, due to crusting, the soil wouldn't absorb moisture and simply didn't look like it could ever be properly fertile. As you know, donkeys can stomp the ground, and they do it really well. So much so that they even outdo other livestock. In many areas, this causes damage, but on those degraded lands where the crust has already become a permanent shield for the soil, donkeys are, surprisingly, actually helpful. Under the weight of donkey hooves, the compacted layer breaks down, allowing falling precipitation to finally soak into the soil instead of going somewhere water is totally unwanted. Thanks to the donkeys, plants now have a chance to grow in an area where sparse vegetation has become the main feature. Besides that, when donkeys walk around, they help break up the crust while mixing the sparse local grass with the topsoil, creating a natural mulch that holds rainwater for a long time and slowly decomposes, enriching the soil with organic carbon and nutrients. Thanks to this kind of living cultivator, even in the very first season after heavy rains, long-awaited permanent streams appeared on Kitchana. The water didn't just run off the surface, but soaked deep into the soil, feeding the roots of grasses and shrubs. Local ecologists confirm the soils and grazing areas are noticeably darker, softer, and richer. And between the rocky slopes, thickets of hooked shrubs and poaceae have sprouted where before everything was barren. Besides mechanically loosening the soil, wild donkeys on Kitchana Station serve another important role, reducing the risk of severe fires. Researchers from Queensland University of Technology set up surveillance cameras at the station and found that areas with donkeys build up far less dry grass and shrubs on the surface. The donkeys trim them with their hooves and eat them, creating natural barriers against fire spread. This makes the land stand out from nearby unused areas where without animals, fine, dry brush quickly turns into a continuous living fuse. Moreover, the station also noticed the feces effect. Donkey manure is, as always with herbivores, a natural product that can be called a fertilizer. Picture this. You've got degraded soil. Then along comes a donkey, full from a hefty meal. It drops some manure packed with just what the plants need. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and a bunch of other elements, each one complementing the others, and all of them together giving plants what it takes to grow strong and healthy. While donkeys also play a role in spreading plants, the animals eat all kinds of vegetation, grasses, legume seeds, and little shrubs, and a lot of those seeds pass through their digestive system nearly untouched. When they end up in manure, they find themselves in a setting packed with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which makes it ideal for germination. Meanwhile, research shows that seeds that spent time inside a hoofed animal sprout quicker and more reliably than ones left lying on the ground. It's also worth mentioning that donkey dung piles act as a kind of garden bed. Each one is a little bundle of nutrients, where seeds are shielded from birds and temperature swings, and as the manure breaks down, the soil around it gets looser and moister. Perfect conditions for a young root system. And if, say, there are plants around with sticky or spiky shells, then spreading gets even easier. The seeds stick to the donkey's fur, then get carried dozens of miles from where they started, helping the species spread and mix genes between isolated populations. How about the information that donkeys can be the reason why water appears in certain areas, allowing other animals to survive? Yep, they can do that too, but let's take it one step at a time. Scientists have a theory that animals playing the role of water engineers goes way back. In the late Pleistocene era, when Diprotodons, the biggest marsupials ever known, roamed across Australia along with other massive herbivores, their hooves and heavy bodies carved out paths to deep underground water sources. These wells, along with natural erosion, created rare but vital sources of moisture around which small mammals, birds, and reptiles would gather. In a similar way, modern researchers describe elephants in Africa and Asia as remarkable well architects, digging in dried-up riverbeds to reach groundwater for themselves and hundreds of other species. Beneath gravel and dense clay deposits, donkeys dig a channel into the underground layers, which, according to researchers, results in wells 5 to 6 feet deep. And just a few days later, kangaroos, wombats, and all sorts of birds show up at these wells to quench their thirst in the middle of the dry season. At the same time, surveillance cameras register that without these wells, many species would lose access to water for months. Alongside the wells, donkeys create what are known as donkey baths, shallow, barely noticeable dips in the soft sand and silt where the animals rub against rocks or simply roll around in the dust. When it rains, these dips collect up to 1.2 inches of precipitation, holding water longer than the surrounding soil and turning into real living reservoirs. Along the edges of these pools, fresh greenery starts to sprout. Plus, like we said, donkeys can bring in seeds which will happily sprout in a place with enough moisture, and the manure coming from those same animals acts like a booster when the plants are low on nutrients. And of course, these dips, like wells, become a water source for lots of other animals that struggle to find this precious resource in the dry conditions spread across vast parts of Australia. These two mechanisms, deep trampling and water collecting in donkey baths, together create a whole network of local reservoirs. During long droughts, water slowly filters from the donkey wells into the surrounding soil layers, feeding the roots of shrubs and grasses, and the next rains gather in the hollows, forming many reservoirs. As a result, stable oases can form on dry slopes. Around the wells and donkey baths, thickets of low bushes can grow, and the biodiversity of microorganisms and small invertebrates increases many times over. So, wild donkeys provide a rare example of restoring the functions of vanished megafauna. They not only provide water, but also reshape the landscape and rebuild the microclimate. On top of that, donkeys might be the cause behind rising biodiversity in arid regions, affecting everything from reptiles to marsupials and birds. Nevertheless, all these impressive effects don't yet mean that in Australia, donkeys have turned from pests into saviors of degraded land. For example, the experience of Chris Hengler, the man behind everything they tried at the Kachana station, is more of a successful local story than a major scientific breakthrough. The farmer himself stresses that the achievements depend on the unique mix of Kimberley's climate, soil, and terrain, and any other region with different hydrology and flora might deliver completely different results. Besides, Hengler's methods require constant monitoring. Donkey grazing must be strictly limited to designated zones, or else the risks of overgrazing and degradation can easily come back. To turn this exciting backcountry story into an actual tool for restoring land, we need to launch a series of controlled studies across different climate zones, gather long-term data on rainfall and vegetation changes, and develop clear herd management protocols. Besides that, it's worth saying that the situation with wild donkeys in Australia is unlikely to change drastically. Right now, a huge number of these animals roam the continent unchecked, which negatively affects those areas that don't need their surface crust broken up or donkey wells or baths created. And that won't change. You can't just gather all the donkeys and send them to specific spots, so the culling will continue. However, in the long run, if the positive impact of donkeys on degraded lands is studied more thoroughly, gains support from authorities, and the necessary approvals are secured, it's possible that programs will appear in which at least part of these pests will be used to turn around vast stretches of Australia's arid and unproductive lands. However, donkeys have a role that doesn't require proof from research anymore. They're used as guards. Farmers all across the continent, from the vast pastures of New South Wales to the most remote areas, actively use donkeys as reliable watch animals, effectively protecting their flocks of sheep, goats, and even calves. From what? Well, it wasn't just horses and donkeys that were brought to Australia. One of the biggest threats to any herd of sheep, goats, or cows is dogs. The first dogs to set paw on the continent were the ancestors of dingoes, who came with Asian seafarers 4,000 to 8,000 years ago. These animals went feral, adapted well, and took over as the apex predator. With the arrival of the Europeans in 1788, the second wave began. The settlers brought domestic breeds for all kinds of needs. Over time, many of them ran away or were abandoned, mixing with dingoes. And today, all these dogs have spread almost across the entire continent, roaming free, with a strong urge to attack some herd of sheep or goats. Another threat to any herd is foxes. That's right, they didn't appear on the continent out of nowhere. These animals were brought over by British settlers in the mid-19th century, mainly for sport hunting, to recreate the traditions of their homeland on this remote continent. However, without natural predators and with plenty of easy prey around, foxes quickly multiplied, leading to the inevitable result. After a short time, about 80% of mainland Australia was taken over by these red predators. Today, their numbers are estimated at around 1.7 million, although some estimates go as high as 7.2 million. These predators are found in nearly every habitat, except for the far tropical north and some islands. Basically, they're wherever there's prey, including livestock like sheep and goats. So how do donkeys deal with these sharp-toothed predators? They actively chase down their enemy using their powerful hooves and loud, intimidating brays to scare off even the boldest dogs or foxes. There are plenty of documented stories where a single donkey successfully defended an entire herd, stopping attacks that could have caused devastating losses for the farmer. A key part of donkeys' success as guard animals is their ability to form strong social bonds. When a donkey's placed with a herd at a young age, it quickly fits in, seeing sheep, goats, or calves as part of its own family. This deep sense of belonging and attachment drives the donkey to instinctively protect its charges from any perceived threat. It becomes not just a guard, but a vital member of the herd whose constant presence and vigilance provide around-the-clock protection. At the same time, unlike specially trained guard dogs, which require significant investment in training and veterinary care, donkeys are much less demanding. They can also boast impressive longevity, living up to 20 and in some cases even 30 years, making them a smart long-term investment. Additionally, their ability to adapt to tough Australian conditions lets them eat rough plants, which significantly lowers upkeep costs and makes them ideal for vast, often dry grazing lands. Success stories of donkeys as herd protectors keep piling up across Australia. For instance, on a farm in New South Wales, young donkeys that were well socialized and introduced into sheep flocks started effectively scaring off predators within just a few weeks using loud braying and hoof strikes. After that, the farm owner noticed a clear positive trend. After the donkeys were introduced, livestock losses dropped sharply, and on some farms stopped altogether. In the Hunter Valley, farmers who had long suffered from wild dog attacks also decided to put donkeys to the test. At one farm, just 2 donkeys brought in through a wild animal adaptation program started working as herd guards. And yes, it worked. Not a single sheep was harmed by predators in the following months. Another striking example? A farm near Curran, Queensland, where they originally had just 2 donkeys guarding a herd of calves. In the past year, their number has grown to several dozen. The owner says the donkeys have a remarkable ability to sense danger even before people or machines notice anything. Yes, this is the point where we should say that this doesn't apply to wild donkeys. To make these animals protect sheep or goats, they need to be introduced into the herd at a young age. But that's not quite the case. For example, there's a program called Last Stop Donkey, where wild donkeys are caught in areas where they cause damage and then moved into herds and trained to become effective livestock guards. So even the wildest, most troublesome donkey doesn't have to be shot. It can actually be really useful.